civil defence were in charge of response to bombings in inland in England. When the Blitz started, the civil defence were the first line of response. You had the ARPs on site who would first report into the ARP warden's site. That would then be telephoned over to various sites in Woolwich, so you had Eltham and Woolwich Centre. Both of those centres would then decide what was needed, heavy lifting gear, whether there were gas leaks, ambulances, mortuary vans. They would be the people that would then contact in the next stage to the people to come down and help on site. Now, they wouldn't just have one site that they would need to go to. You have to remember that during a bombing raid, the sites would be multiple. So they would be having multiple calls coming in from different ARP posts and different people having to decide what was needed and where. Sometimes it must have been very difficult for them because they would have to decide which ambulances to dispatch, such as Woolwich would have 3 ambulances that they could dispatch at the time. They might need more. Then they would have to call to another site. So the civil defence was very, very important because they were the people that dealt with the aftermath of the bombing. We're very lucky that we had 2 metropolitan boroughs in the area. So you had the Metropolitan Borough of Woolwich, the Metropolitan Borough of Greenwich. The Metropolitan Borough of Greenwich civil defence records that we have kept, they are the originals and it's very interesting to read, but they more detail the response, the area and who was needed, what time the incident started, what time it ended and what the outcome was. The Woolwich record the same, but we are very lucky that we have the independent reports. So each little report that was taken from the ARP up to the Woolwich Centre, up to the Eltham Centre, you had they detailed the ambulance posts, the stretcher party posts. You can see where they've been ticked off, what they needed. And also they have the occurrence. So each bombing incident was given an occurrence number. And so you can link the different little pieces of paper together by the occurrence number. So we learn so much more from these individual pieces of paper from a historical site because we can actually see what time the report came in, what time it was dealt with, what time the stretcher parties, if they were needed, went out. And it is fascinating to see how quickly they got everybody out where they were needed. One of the incidences that is really interesting and that we have quite a bit of information about is Sandbach Place in Plumstead. It was a small terrace of houses, I can't remember exactly how many, but literally about 12 probably houses on either side, very small. Why we can learn a lot about that is because we not only have the bomb map, which shows the incident and it shows that the road was totally destroyed, we also have images taken from the time, and it was a V2 rocket which landed on the 3rd of August 1944 at 7:35 in the morning. So you can imagine there'll be a lot of people getting up, getting ready to go to work. It must have been absolutely devastating because with the V2 there would have been no warning. It would have just landed and caused devastation. We have these images that would tell you how many people died, but they're also very poignant because they show people just looking, people's belongings, just the total devastation. And then we can look at the civil defence records, and on the civil defence records that will tell you what time the incident came in, and that correlates with the picture that we have. It'll also tell you what was needed, ambulances, mortuary vans, because 4 people died, 29 were injured, so they would have been first aid posts, stretcher parties. It would have been a really big incident, and we are very lucky that we have both the map to show us the devastation, the images to then convey how awful it must have been for the people visually by just looking at the picture, and also the civil defence just to show how heroic the people were that dealt with such a awful and terrifying incident, to have to go in and recover people from such a devastating bomb that completely obliterated a whole street and some of the street next to it. It just must have been awful for the people to do that, but it does tell us the story. The collection acquired these items most likely through the Metropolitan Borough of Woolwich. They would have obviously had some department within their particular council that they would have put all of these old records after the war. Quite often it would have been perhaps for insurance claims when people were looking to recover some way of building their house, or at least their lost valuables and things. We don't really know why they kept them. We're very lucky that they did, but it was most likely for reference, I would think. Then what happened was the Metropolitan Borough of Woolwich and the Metropolitan Borough of Greenwich became the London Borough of Greenwich in 1965. So again, these records would have been transferred over to the governing body. The archive itself wasn't really in existence then. Local history libraries would have taken things in, but it was these records would have most likely stayed with the council themselves. So the Greenwich Heritage Centre was formed in 2003. It was the amalgamation of the Plumstead Museum and the local studies and archives at Woodlands in Mycenae Road. When these were amalgamated, the records were all transferred over from both sites, and quite a lot of council records were included, probably because by the time the Heritage Centre was built, the council were looking to find a safe deposit place where these records could be held for future generations. And as I say, we're very lucky because lots of local historians, people doing their family history, looking to see what happened to their relatives and ancestors, they can find out from these records exactly how they died, when they died. That will be recorded both in the memorial books that we have from the Second World War. We also have them from the First World War, but also in the Commonwealth Graves website. And once you've found that, it's really, really good for your research and also to know more about these people, to actually see the images of what happened to them and where these places are. Also on the bomb maps, it gives you an idea of the devastation of the area. So to have all of these historical records, it helps build up the history of the area that we live in, and it gives a sense as to why sometimes when you're driving down the road, you've got a row of Victorian houses and there might be some 1970s houses squashed in between them. And that's most likely because there was a bomb site there, and quite possibly a bomb site there for at least 20 years or more before people built the houses that you see now. So also for house history, people quite often like the idea of when was my house built, or why is my house different from everything else in the street, and people do discover that their houses were built on the site of some of these bombings.